And to all of you listening, it's a real honor to present some of this work to you all. As Jeff said, this year in particular, I am in awe of what first responders have done this year and every year. My wife's a medical doctor, so she was on the front lines. And as I'll share, my father was a first responder as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about awe. I know you've heard a lot about awe. I'm going to go into some of its components that you may not have heard about before, how we measure it, and how it fits with other positive, impactful experiences. But let's start with a few examples. You've probably seen this before in some other presentations. It's a classic awe-inspiring scene. And in the chat, just pop a yes in there if you've seen this particular scene before, if you've ever been down to the Grand Canyon. Another way that people access awe is artwork. This particular painting was in the Philadelphia Art Museum for a little while, but really any local art museum, not everything's for everyone, but usually you can find something that will stop you in your tracks. But art is another common source of awe. And then pop a yes in the chat if you've seen this. This is a picture of a black hole that was taken last year. I saw this on social media, and this, this totally stopped me from scrolling, and I was absolutely amazed that what's possible through science today. I wish that people shared this kind of material on social media more rather than the other stuff that people put out there. Now here's a quintessential awe moment. Only 500 or 600 human beings have ever been up to high Earth orbit and able to see the Earth as a whole. Astronauts refer to this as the overview effect, and they say that it's life-changing, seeing not only the beauty and the grandeur of Earth, as well as the vastness and blackness of space that we're floating through, but also the preciousness of our planet and the fact that we're all in this together. Here's the great city of New York. I think it's an awe-inspiring skyline. I'm sure many of you have seen this many times. Now, these are all pretty typical awe-inspiring images, right? And it probably may not have occurred to you that awe happens in our daily life, and it can happen on the job as well. And so my father was a firefighter, and maybe if we were having a drink or two, after a few minutes or maybe an hour or so, every now and again, I'd start talking to him about what it's like to be in a building on fire. And it was interesting what he chose to talk about to me. I'm sure there's all kinds of things he could have talked about, but when I was younger, he would talk about how it felt to turn over and to look up at the ceiling of a fully involved fire and to see the fire rolling across the ceiling. And I'm sure there's a lot of things he was feeling in those moments, but one of the things he chose to focus on, at least in our conversations, was the awe that he felt. He said it was the most beautiful thing that he's ever seen. And I think that had a big impact on me personally. And so I want to turn this over to you all. If you could just close your eyes for a moment and take a nice deep breath in, and just let whatever moment from your work that you felt awe come to you. Doesn't need to be the biggest moment, doesn't need to be anything particularly dramatic, but some moment where on the job you felt this feeling of awe overwhelm you. So just let your mind bring something up and just notice how you felt in your body. Notice what happened in your mind, your thoughts, how you felt afterwards. Take another nice deep breath in. And you can open your eyes as you let that breath out. Now, I wish that we could hear from some people, but we don't have the time for it. But if you're interested in sharing your story, you can go to this website, varietiescorpus.com, and you can write about your experience, and actually it will help our research. So that if that's of interest, we'd love to hear from you. I'm sure you've seen this definition a number of times, but just we always like to define our terms here. So we call awe a perception of vastness, and that vastness can be perceptual, like seeing the Grand Canyon, a lot of space, or it can be conceptual, like seeing an astronaut seeing Earth from orbit and realizing that everything we care about is on this one little ball floating in space. And then the need for accommodation is to somehow understand or care about the experience, right? So you might feel awe as you first take off in an airplane, but after an hour or so, you don't really care about the window, looking out the window anymore. You're going to flip on that television. So this need for accommodation is mentally processing that perception of vastness. Now, I think awe falls along a continuum of other experiences in terms of how connected we feel to others during moments of awe. So moments like flow, where we feel our sense of self and time go away. Mindfulness, you may have taken a mindfulness meditation training, when we feel deep feelings of love for friends and family. And then awe sits right between these kinds of experiences that you feel on a more of an everyday kind of basis to peak and mystical type experience. Now, at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, I study using psychedelic substances to treat depression and addiction. You may have heard about this on the news recently. And it seems like what's the therapeutic aspect of these substances is their ability to sometimes create mystical experiences. So I think awe falls along this continuum. It doesn't happen every day, it may not happen every week, but it's more common than these rare once in a lifetime experiences, but it's at least still a little uncommon. I'm going to talk to you about a study where we asked people to do exactly what I asked you to do. We asked people to think about a moment of awe, all right? And we asked about 500 people in this case. This is one study of many. We've actually asked tens of thousands of people at this point. Now, here are some examples that we get when we just ask people to report moments of awe. Now, I asked you to think of one that occurred on the job. This is just any moment of awe. So here's someone talking about a view of the lake during a winter holiday, and pretty common stimulus, but you see some useful descriptors here. My jaw dropped, jaw-droppingly beautiful a couple times. My eyes lit up, face was grinning from joy, relief. So here are some clues about how we might measure awe, which we'll go into in a moment. Here's more of that conceptual vastness. So hearing Elon Musk talk about sending humans to Mars, right? This is kind of a mind-blowing idea in terms of the vastness involved. And then lastly, kind of sweet story about a guy talking about his honeymoon with his wife and seeing these massive Rocky Mountains. So what we do as psychologists, we read thousands and thousands of descriptions like this, and what we pull out are these individual questions. We make a whole bunch of these questions, hundreds of them actually, and they look very much like this. So as I go through a few of these questions, I want you to choose for that moment of awe that you thought of. I want you to choose which of these fits that moment of awe. So did you sense things momentarily slow down? Okay, try to think of your answer. Did you feel small compared to everything else? Did you feel closely connected to humanity? I know I'm going quick, but so you have to just go with your gut, whatever your first response is. Experience something greater than myself.
Hey, David, just heads up, just under 5 minutes.
Okay, great. We're on track here. Felt my jaw drop and struggled to take in all I was experiencing at once. So once we have the answer to hundreds of these questions, we do something called factor analysis, which involves a lot of complex matrix algebra that luckily we don't have to go into. And computer programs are able to do a lot of this work now. And what we result in is 6 different clusters. So these are kind of sub-scales, what we call them, of awe, or they're sub-factors of awe. So time changing, feeling of the self gets smaller, feeling a sense of connectedness to other people, that vastness, which is part of the definition, physical changes like jaw dropping, eyes widening, and accommodation, which is also part of the definition. Now, if you go to scottbarrykaufman.com Awe Experience Scale, you can take this measure. You could just Google it, and you can write about your experience and actually take this scale. We also found here some of the triggers for awe. So for most people, it's beauty, scenery or artwork, right? But also ability of our fellow human beings and the virtue of our fellow human beings. For some people, it's religious or spiritual. And then for some people, it's threat. It could be a thunderstorm or a natural disaster of some kind even. So negative triggers can actually trigger awe as well. And here's some more granular kind of look at some of these triggers for awe. Natural scenery seems like the quickest and easiest way to get there. But other people, interpersonal awe. You may hear my colleague Mariana Graziosi talk a little bit about interpersonal awe. Awe from other people, loved ones, coworkers, colleagues. And then you see monuments, art, music. Awe is ambivalent. It's a little bit negative, but it's mostly positive. So that makes it an interesting emotion. I'm glad there's a whole symposium organized by Jeff about awe, because I think it's so interesting to learn about. At least I think so. Other research, as you've probably seen from my other colleagues, Dacher Keltner, and many others doing great work on this, pretty consistent finding. You experience more awe. It's associated with overall happiness, well-being, health, extremely important for the difficult job you all do, and also causes pro-social behavior. I mean, helping people all the time is very difficult. People talk about compassion fatigue and burnout. There seems to be something about awe where when you feel awe, you have this kind of impulse where you want to help other people around you, and that could kind of refill the well, so to speak, or provide some kind of refreshment for that impulse to help others. Now, a lot more research needs to be done on how to intervene on providing people with more awe and if it's all that effective. But these are correlations that are very intriguing to follow up on, I think. And there's been at least some experimental work suggesting that you can cause more happiness, well-being, and pro-social behavior in people. So I know I'm running out of time here, and I want to make sure I have a chance to answer your questions. But basically, some takeaways: awe can be measured. It has those 6 components, which I think are very interesting psychological categories, and you can take these tests online, very easy to do. Importantly, and probably the reason why you're here, is experiencing more awe is indeed associated with well-being, happiness, health, and pro-social behavior. And there's lots of sources of awe: natural scenery, virtue, other people, mastery, art, science. It's all around us if we take the time to look. So that's it for me. Thank you so much for your attention. I appreciate it. And thanks again, Jeff.